The space station Kepler-7 floated in the darkness between three bright stars. It was huge, bigger than most cities on Earth. The station was home to the Galactic Naval Academy, where young people from many different worlds came to learn how to be officers in the space fleet. Jiho walked through the long metal hallways of the academy. His boots made soft sounds on the floor. He carried his books in a bag over his shoulder. Jiho was 20 years old and came from Earth. He was studying to be an engineer. He wanted to fix the big engines that powered starships. The hallways were full of students from many different worlds. Some looked almost like humans but had blue skin or pointed ears. Others were very different. There were tall, thin people with 4 arms. There were short, round people covered in fur. Some students walked on 2 legs like humans. Others crawled or floated. Jiho had been at the academy for 6 months now. He was getting used to seeing all these different types of people. At first, it had been strange. Now, it felt normal. He walked into his room and found his roommate Minho sitting at his desk. Minho was also from Earth, from Korea like Jiho, but Minho was very different from Jiho. Where Jiho was quiet and liked to study alone, Minho was loud and friendly. He liked to talk to everyone. "Jiho," Minho said with a big smile. "How were your classes today?" "Good," Jiho said. He put his bag down and sat on his bed. "We learned about plasma engines today. Very interesting." Minho laughed. "Only you would think engines are interesting. I had combat training today. We practiced fighting with the Coraxian students. Those big lizard people are very strong." Jiho nodded. The Coraxians were one of the many types of aliens at the academy. They looked like large lizards that walked on 2 legs. They had thick, dark green skin and sharp teeth. Most of them were very good at fighting. "Speaking of aliens," Minho said, "did you hear about the new student?" "What new student?" Jiho asked. "A Vaelter girl arrived yesterday. She's the first one they've allowed into the academy." Jiho felt surprised. The Vaelter were a people that the galactic government had fought a war against 3 years ago. The war had been terrible. Many people had died on both sides. The Vaelter had lost the war and their planet had been taken over. Why would they let a Vaelter come here? Jiho asked. Minho shrugged. The government says it's part of some integration program. They want to show that former enemies can work together now. But I don't think many people are happy about it. Just then, their friend Nari knocked on the door and came in. Nari was a girl from Earth who was studying military tactics. She was very smart and always got the best grades in her classes. "Are you talking about the Vaelter girl?" she asked. "I saw her in the cafeteria today. She was sitting alone. Nobody would go near her." "What does she look like?" Jiho asked. "Like most Vaelter, I suppose," Nari said. "She has that reptile-like skin, but it's more silver than green. Her eyes are very large and dark. She's smaller than I expected. Most Vaelter warriors are supposed to be very big and strong. Maybe she's not a warrior," Minho said. "All Vaelter are warriors," Nari said. "That's what they're known for. They start training to fight when they're very young. That's why the war was so hard to win." Jiho thought about this. He remembered hearing about the war on the news when he was younger. The Vaelter had attacked several peaceful planets. The galactic government had to fight back to protect innocent people. Many human soldiers had died fighting against Vaelter warriors, but he also remembered hearing that many Vaelter had died too. Their planet had been bombed heavily during the war. Millions of Vaelter civilians had lost their homes. "What's her name?" Jiho asked. "Zira," Nari said. "I heard one of the teachers call her that." The next day, Jiho saw Zira for the first time. He was walking to his engineering class when he spotted her in the hallway. She was trying to find her classroom, looking at a small device that showed a map of the station. Nari had been right about how she looked. Zira had skin that looked like scales, but they were silver and seemed to shine a little in the light. She was shorter than Jiho expected, maybe the same height as Nari. Her eyes were very large and completely black. She wore the same gray uniform that all students wore, but it seemed too big for her. As Jiho watched, A group of Coraxian students walked past Zira. One of them, a big male named Tarek, bumped into her hard with his shoulder. Zira stumbled and dropped her books. "Watch where you're going, scaleface," Tarek said in a loud voice. His friends laughed. Zira said nothing. She bent down to pick up her books. Her face showed no emotion, but Jiho could see her hands shaking a little. Other students in the hallway had stopped to watch. Some of them were laughing too. Others just stared. Nobody offered to help Zira pick up her books. Jiho felt uncomfortable watching this. He wanted to help, but he wasn't sure what to do. By the time he decided to walk over, Zira had picked up all her books and walked away quickly. That afternoon, Jiho had lunch with Minho and Nari in the big cafeteria. The cafeteria was always busy and noisy. Students from different worlds sat in groups, usually with their own kind. The humans sat together, the Coraxians sat together, and so on. Jiho looked around the cafeteria and found Zira sitting alone at a small table in the corner. She had a tray of food in front of her, but she wasn't eating much. She just sat there, looking down at her hands. "Look at her," Minho said, following Jiho's gaze. "She looks so sad." "I heard some of the other students talking about her," Nari said quietly. "They're saying she shouldn't be here. They think it's wrong to let a Veilter into the academy after what her people did during the war." "But the war is over," Jiho said, "and she's just one person. She didn't start the war." "Try telling that to the students who lost family members." "Fighting against the Veilter," Nari replied. Jiho understood this. War created hard feelings that took a long time to heal. But looking at Zira sitting alone, she just looked like a scared young girl who was very far from home. As they ate their lunch, more students came over to their table to talk about Zira. Most of them said negative things about her. Some said she was probably a spy. Others said she was dangerous and shouldn't be trusted. A few students defended her. "She's just a student like us," said Heian, a girl who was studying to be a doctor. "We should give her a chance." But most students disagreed. "The Veilter killed thousands of people," said Dong Yun, who was training to be a pilot. "My uncle died fighting them. Why should we be nice to one of them now?" Jiho listened to all this talk but didn't say much. He kept looking over at Zira, who continued to sit alone. He wondered what she was thinking about. Was she homesick? Was she scared? Did she regret coming to the academy? When lunch was over, Jiho watched Zira leave the cafeteria. She walked with her head down, not looking at anyone. Other students moved out of her way, but not in a polite way. They moved like they didn't want to get too close to her that night. Jiho lay in his bed thinking about Zira and everything he had heard that day. The academy was supposed to be a place where young people from different worlds learned to work together. But it seemed like some old hatreds were still very strong. He wondered what tomorrow would bring for the lonely Veilter girl. The next few weeks were hard for Zira. Every day seemed to bring new problems. Jiho watched from a distance as other students made her life difficult in many small ways. In the morning, Zira would go to the cafeteria for breakfast. She would stand in line like everyone else, but somehow she always ended up at the back. Other students would cut in front of her or pretend they didn't see her. By the time she got to the food, only the worst meals were left. Jiho saw this happen many times. He wanted to say something, but he wasn't sure what to do. Minho and Nari saw it too. "Someone should help her," Nari said one morning as they watched Zira get pushed to the back of the line again. "Why don't you help her then?" Minho asked. Nari looked uncomfortable. I don't know. What if the other students get angry at me?" Too, this was the problem. Everyone could see that Zira was being treated badly, but nobody wanted to be the first person to help her. They were afraid of what other students might think. The worst treatment came from Tarek and his Coraxian friends. Coraxians were naturally bigger and stronger than most other species. Tarek was especially large, even for a Coraxian. He seemed to enjoy making Zira's life miserable. During combat training class, students practiced fighting in pairs. Tarek always volunteered to fight against Zira. The teacher, Commander Voss, allowed this because he said it was good training for both of them, but Jiho could see that Tarek was not just training. He was trying to hurt Zira. He hit harder than necessary. When Zira fell down, he would step on her tail by accident. He would grab her arm and twist it until she made small sounds of pain. The strange thing was that Zira was actually very good at fighting. Even though Tarek was much bigger than her, she was faster and smarter. Sometimes she would win their practice fights. But when she won, Tarek would get angry and fight even harder the next time. "She's making him look bad," Minho explained to Jiho after one particularly rough practice session. "Tarek is supposed to be the best fighter in our year, but this small Veilter girl keeps beating him. It hurts his pride." After combat class, Jiho saw Zira walking slowly to the medical station. She was holding her left arm carefully. Tarek had twisted it too hard during their last fight. Jiho followed her to the medical station. The doctor there was a kind woman named Dr. Kim, who was also from Earth. "This is the third time this week," Dr. Kim said as she looked at Zira's arm. "These injuries are getting worse." "I am clumsy," Zira said quietly. "I fall down during training." "Doctor." Kim looked at her with serious eyes. "These are not injuries from falling down. Someone is hurting you on purpose." Zira said nothing. She just looked at the floor. "You can report this," Dr. Kim said. "The academy has rules against students hurting each other." "No," Zira said quickly. "Please, no reports. It will only make things worse." Double quotes. Dr. Kim fixed Zira's arm with a medical device. "At least tell me who is doing this to you." But Zira shook her head and left without saying another word. The problems were not just physical. In their classes, other students would refuse to work with Zira on group projects. When teachers assigned partners, nobody wanted to be her partner. She always ended up working alone. In chemistry class, someone put salt in her water bottle. Salt was not dangerous to most species, but it made Veilter very sick. Zira spent the rest of that day in the medical station. In history class, someone wrote bad words about Veilter on her chair before she sat down. The words were written in a special ink that would stick to clothes and be very hard to wash out. Zira had to wear a dirty uniform for 3 days, until she could get a new one. Even some human students joined in the cruel behavior. A girl named Yuna seemed especially eager to prove that she didn't like Veilter. Yuna was not very popular with the other human students, so she thought that being mean to Zira might make her fit in better. "Why is she even here?" Yuna said loudly. In the cafeteria one day, "The Veilter are our enemies. My brother fought in the war. He came home with terrible injuries because of them." Other students nodded and agreed with Yuna. Soon there was a group of students from different species, who all shared their hate for Veilter. They would sit together and talk about how wrong it was for Zira to be at the academy. Jiho listened to all this talk and felt more uncomfortable each day. He had learned more about the war since Zira arrived. Yes, the Veilter had done terrible things. They had attacked peaceful planets and killed many innocent people, but Zira was just one person. She was young, probably about the same age as Jiho. She hadn't been a soldier in the war. She was probably just a child when the war happened. Jiho said to Minho one evening. "Maybe," Minho replied. "But her people still did those things. And Veilter children are taught to fight from a very young age. Who knows what she was doing during the war?" Jiho didn't have a good answer for this. He didn't know anything about Zira's past. Maybe she had been involved in the war somehow. Or maybe she had just been a scared child hiding while her world was destroyed. The situation got worse during a special training exercise. All students had to work in teams to complete a mission in the space simulation room. This was a big room, where computers created fake environments that felt real. Students could practice flying ships, exploring planets, or fighting battles without any real danger. Zira was assigned to a team with Tarek and 4 other students. Their mission was to explore a dangerous planet and bring back important information. Jiho's team was doing a different mission in another part of the simulation, but he could hear what was happening on the radio. All teams used the same communication system. At first, everything seemed normal. Zira's team landed on the fake planet and began exploring. But after an hour, Jiho heard Tarek's voice on the radio. "This is Team 7, Tarek said. We are under attack by enemy forces. We need to retreat immediately. What about team member Zira? Asked the instructor's voice. There was a pause. Then Tarek said, She got separated from the group. We couldn't find her. We had to leave without her. Jiho felt worried. In the simulation, being left alone on a hostile planet was very dangerous. Students could die in the simulation, which meant they failed the exercise, but something seemed wrong about Tarek's story. How could Zira get separated from her team? And why didn't they try harder to find her? Later, Jiho learned what really happened. Some students who were watching the exercise told him the truth. Tarek and his team had deliberately left Zira alone in a dangerous area. They had told her to scout ahead, then moved in a different direction and left her there. She was supposed to fail, one student explained. They wanted her to get killed in the simulation so she would look bad in front of the instructors, but Zira had not failed. Somehow, she had completed the entire mission by herself. She had fought off the fake enemies, gathered the required information, and escaped from the planet. She did better than most teams who worked together. This made her enemies even more angry. Instead of proving that she didn't belong at the academy, Zira had proven that she was better than them. That night, Jiho couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Zira being abandoned by her team. He imagined how scared and alone she must have felt. But she had not given up. She had finished the mission and done it well. He remembered something his grandfather had told him once. The best way to judge a person's character is to see how they treat someone who cannot help them in return. By that measure, most of the students at the academy were failing badly. Jiho decided that something had to change. He couldn't keep watching Zira suffer while doing nothing to help. But he also knew that helping her might make his own life at the academy much harder. He fell asleep still thinking about what he should do. Things got much worse for Zira after the simulation exercise. Word spread quickly about how she had completed the mission alone after her team abandoned her. Instead of earning respect, this seemed to make other students dislike her even more. She's showing off, Yuna complained loudly during lunch. She thinks she's better than everyone else. Typical Veilter arrogance, Tarek added. They always think they're the best warriors in the galaxy. That's why they started the war in the first place. Jiho wanted to point out that Zira never acted like she was better than anyone. She barely spoke to other students at all. She kept her head down and tried to avoid attention. But saying this would only make Tarek and Yuna angry at him too. The harassment became more organized. Tarek started a group that he called the Academy Defense League. He said their job was to protect the academy from dangerous elements. Everyone knew he really meant protecting it from Zira. More students joined Tarek's group every day. They came from different species, but they all shared a hatred of the Veilter. Some had lost family members in the war. Others just wanted to fit in with the popular crowd. The group began playing cruel tricks on Zira. They would hide her books so she couldn't study. They would break her equipment before important classes. They would spread rumors about her that made other students afraid. One morning, Jiho found Zira in the library. She was sitting alone at a table, trying to read from a book that had been damaged. Someone had poured sticky liquid on the pages. "This is my only copy of Advanced Engineering Principles," she said quietly when she noticed Jiho looking. "I saved money for months to buy it. Why don't you report this to the instructors?" Jiho asked. Zira gave him a sad smile. "I tried reporting things before. They say they will investigate, but nothing ever happens. And then the people who hurt me get angry that I told on them, so they hurt me worse." Jiho felt angry about this. The academy was supposed to protect all students. But the instructors seemed to think that what happened to Zira was not their problem. "Maybe they think you deserve it," Jiho said, then immediately felt bad for saying such a cruel thing, but Zira just nodded. "Yes, they think I deserve it because of what my people did during the war. They think all Veilter are bad, so it's okay to treat me badly." "That's not fair," Jiho said. "Fair?" Zira laughed, but it was not a happy sound. "My family lived on a farming planet. We grew food and minded our own business. When the war started, we didn't even know why it was happening. But when the bombing began, it didn't matter that we were peaceful. The bombs killed my parents and my little brother anyway. Fair is just a word, Jiho. It doesn't mean anything in the real world. This was the most Zira had ever said to him. Jiho felt shocked to learn about her family. He had assumed she was from a military family since all Vaelter were supposed to be warriors, but she had been a farmer's daughter whose family died in the war. I'm sorry, he said. Don't be sorry, Zira replied. Just, if you really want to help me, don't let them see you talking to me. They will start hurting you too, but it was too late for that warning. Tarek and two of his friends had seen Jiho talking to Zira in the library. That afternoon, they cornered him in the hallway. What were you doing with the scale face? Tarek demanded. Just talking, Jiho said. He tried to sound calm, but his heart was beating fast. Tarek was much bigger than him and looked very angry. You shouldn't talk to enemies, one of Tarek's friends said. It makes you look like a traitor. She's not my enemy, Jiho replied. She's just another student. Tarek stepped closer to Jiho. Listen carefully, human. Stay away from the Vaelter girl. If I see you with her again, you'll be sorry. Jiho felt scared, but he also felt angry. Who was Tarek to tell him who he could talk to? But he was smart enough not to argue with someone who could easily beat him in a fight. The next day brought the worst incident yet. All students had to do a spacewalk exercise as part of their basic training. They wore special suits that let them survive in the vacuum of space while they practiced working on the outside of the station. Each suit had a life support system that provided air and maintained the right temperature. The suits were checked carefully before each exercise to make sure they were safe. Zira's suit had been sabotaged. The problem wasn't discovered until she was already outside the station. Jiho was inside the observation room with other students, watching the exercise on monitors. Everything seemed normal at first. Zira was doing her assigned task, installing a new communication device on the station's hull. Then she began moving. Strangely, her movements became slow and clumsy. Through the radio, they could hear her breathing becoming heavy and fast. Something's wrong, Instructor Lopez said, looking at the readings from Zira's suit. Her oxygen levels are dropping too fast. The suit's life support system was failing. Instead of providing clean air, it was slowly poisoning her with carbon dioxide. Within minutes, she would lose consciousness. In the vacuum of space, that meant death. Emergency retrieval, Instructor Lopez shouted. Get her inside now. It took 5 minutes to bring Zira back inside the station. By then, she had passed out. Her silver skin had turned a sick gray color. The medical team rushed her to the hospital section of the station. While the doctors worked on Zira, engineers examined her spacesuit. What they found made everyone angry. Someone had deliberately damaged the air recycling system. It was not an accident or equipment failure. It was attempted murder. All students were questioned about what happened. Academy security officers interviewed everyone who had access to the equipment room where spacesuits were stored. But nobody admitted to anything, and there was no proof of who had done it. Tarek and his friends all had alibis. They had been in the cafeteria at the time when the sabotage must have happened. Other students confirmed their stories. Yuna was also questioned, but she claimed she had been studying in her room. Her roommate backed up her story. The investigation found no evidence pointing to any specific person. Without proof, the Academy couldn't punish anyone. Zira spent 3 days in the hospital. When she came back to classes, she looked different. The confidence she had shown during combat training was gone. She walked more slowly and kept looking over her shoulder, as if she expected someone to attack her at any moment. Her academic performance began to suffer. She had trouble concentrating in classes. During physical training, she seemed afraid to push herself too hard. It was as if the sabotage had broken something inside her. Jiho watched all this happen and felt terrible. He knew that Tarek was probably responsible for what happened to Zira, even if it couldn't be proven. But he also knew that complaining about it wouldn't help. The Academy administration had already decided they didn't want to get involved. Minho and Nari were also upset about what had happened. They could have killed her, Nari said quietly. This has gone too far. But what can we do? Minho asked. If we try to help her, they'll come after us next. This was the problem that all the decent students at the academy faced. Everyone could see that what was happening to Zero was wrong, but nobody wanted to be the next target. Meanwhile, Tarek and his friends acted like nothing had happened. They continued their campaign of harassment, but they were more careful now. They made sure there was never any evidence that could be traced back to them. The worst part was that their behavior was working. Other students were staying even further away from Zira now. The message was clear. Anyone who associated with her might end up in a damaged spacesuit too. Zira seemed to understand this. She stopped trying to participate in group activities. She sat alone at meals and kept quiet during classes. It was as if she was trying to make herself invisible, but her very presence at the academy continued to anger Tarek and his followers. They didn't just want her to be isolated, they wanted her gone. She doesn't belong here, Tarek said loudly. In the cafeteria one day, the academy made a mistake letting her in. Someone needs to fix that mistake. Jiho knew that things were about to get even worse for Zira. The question was whether anyone would find the courage to stand up for her before it was too late. That night he made a decision that would change everything. The cafeteria was busy as always during lunchtime. Students from dozens of different worlds filled the large room with noise and chatter. Different species sat in their usual groups, creating invisible borders throughout the space. Jiho sat with Minho and Nari at their regular table. They were eating and talking about their morning classes, but Jiho wasn't really listening. His attention kept drifting to the corner of the cafeteria where Zira sat alone. Today was worse than usual. Zira had arrived at the cafeteria early, but every time she tried to get in line for food, other students would cut in front of her. They would pretend they didn't see her or claim they were saving spots for friends. After being pushed back in line many times, Zira finally gave up. She sat at her usual table with an empty tray, just a glass of water in front of her. She stared down at her hands and tried to ignore the cruel laughter coming from nearby tables. "Look at the hungry lizard," someone said loudly enough for half the cafeteria to hear. "Maybe she should go hunt for food like her savage ancestors did," another voice added. The laughter got louder. Students from different species joined in, united in their mockery of the lonely Veilter girl. Even some of the younger students who had not been alive during the war laughed along with the crowd. Yuna was sitting with a group of human students at a nearby table. She stood up and spoke in a voice that carried across the room. "Why should we feed our enemies?" she asked. "The Veilter never showed mercy to the planets they attacked. Why should we show mercy to one of them?" More students cheered and clapped. The noise in the cafeteria grew louder as more people joined the cruel celebration. It was like a feeding frenzy, with Zira as the prey. Jiho felt sick watching all this. He looked at Zira and saw her shoulders shaking slightly. She was trying not to cry in front of everyone, but it was getting harder. "This is horrible," Nari whispered. "Someone should do something." "Like what?" Minho asked. "If we try to help her, they'll turn on us too. So we just sit here and watch," Nari replied. "What else can we do?" Minho said. "There are too many of them. We can't fight the whole cafeteria." Yeho looked around the room. Nearly 200 students were present, and most of them were either laughing at Zira or looking the other way. A few students looked uncomfortable, like Jiho's friends, but none of them were willing to act. The cruelty continued. Someone threw a piece of food in Zira's direction. It missed her, but it landed on her table with a wet splat. This made the crowd laugh even harder. "Food fight with the lizard!" Someone yelled. More food started flying toward Zira's table. She ducked down and covered her head with her arms. The humiliation was complete. She was being treated like an animal in a zoo. That's when something inside Jiho snapped. He stood up from his table so fast that his chair fell backward. The crash was loud enough to get attention from students sitting nearby. Minho and Nari looked up at him with surprise. "Jiho, what are you doing?" Minho asked, but Jiho didn't answer. He was already walking toward the food line with determined steps. The laughter in the cafeteria continued, but some students noticed him moving and wondered what he was planning. Jiho got in line and quickly filled 2 trays with food. He took extra portions of everything: soup, rice, vegetables, meat, and dessert. The lunch worker, a friendly woman from the kitchen staff, smiled at him. "Very hungry today?" she asked. "Something like that," Jiho replied, with a tray in each hand. Jiho walked across the cafeteria toward Zira's table. As he moved, the noise in the room began to die down. Students noticed what he was doing and wondered what would happen next. By the time Jiho reached Zira's corner, the entire cafeteria had become quiet. 200 students watched in silence as he approached the lonely Veilter girl. Zira looked up at him with confusion and fear. She probably thought he was coming to make fun of her like everyone else. Her large, dark eyes were wet with tears. She had been trying not to shed. Jiho set one of the full trays down in front of Zira. Then he sat down across from her and placed the second tray in front of himself. The silence in the cafeteria was so complete that every student could hear what he said next. "Come eat with me." The words were simple and quiet, but they seemed to echo in the huge room. Every person present understood what was happening. This human student was choosing to sit with the outcast. He was sharing his food with the enemy. Zira stared at him with shock. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you're hungry," Jiho replied. "And because it's the right thing to do?" He picked up his spoon and began eating as if nothing unusual was happening. He didn't look around at the other students. He didn't seem to care. That hundreds of eyes were watching his every move. The silence stretched on for long seconds. Then, slowly, whispers began to spread through the crowd. "What is he doing? Has he lost his mind? Doesn't he know what her people did to us?" Tarek stood up from his table, his face dark with anger. "Are you insane, human?" he bellowed across the cafeteria. "Get away from that creature." Jiho looked up calmly. "Her name is Zira," he said in a clear voice that everyone could hear. "And she's a student here, just like the rest of us." "She's a Veilter," Yuna shouted. "They're murderers and savages." "She's a person," Jiho replied simply. He turned back to Zira, who was still staring at him in amazement. "Are you going to eat? The food is getting cold." Zira's hands were shaking as she picked up her spoon. She took a small bite of soup, then another. It was the first real meal she had eaten in days. The cafeteria erupted in angry voices, as students shouted their opinions about what was happening. "He's betraying his own species. Someone should report him to the instructors. The Veilter probably brainwashed him somehow." But mixed in with the angry voices there were other sounds. Some students were talking quietly among themselves, discussing what they had just witnessed. A few even sounded like they approved of what Jiho was doing. Minho and Nari sat at their table, looking shocked by their friend's sudden action. They exchanged glances, having a silent conversation with their eyes. Finally, Minho sighed and shook his head. "I can't believe I'm doing this," he muttered. He picked up his tray and walked over to Jiho's table. "Is there room for one more?" he asked. Jiho smiled. "Always." Minho sat down next to his roommate. The angry voices in the cafeteria got louder. Nari watched her 2 friends sitting with Zira. She thought about all the terrible things that had happened to the Veilter girl over the past weeks. She thought about her own principles and what she claimed to believe about right and wrong. With a deep breath, she picked up her tray and joined them. "This is probably the stupidest thing I've ever done," she said as she sat down. But she was smiling. Now there were 4 students sitting together, 3 humans and 1 Veilter. The sight made some students even angrier, but it also had a different effect on others. A few tables away, Heian watched the scene with interest. Heian was studying to be a doctor, and doctors were supposed to help people who were suffering. She had watched Zira being bullied for weeks and had felt guilty about not doing anything to help. She looked at the food on her tray, then at the angry crowd around her. It would be much easier to stay where she was and avoid trouble. But when she looked at Zira, who was eating her first real meal in days, she knew what she had to do. Hyeon stood up and walked over to join the small group. "Mind if I sit here?" she asked. Please do, Jiho said. As Heian sat down, other students began to notice that something important was happening. This wasn't just one crazy human making a mistake. This was becoming a movement. The anger in the cafeteria was still loud and strong. Tarek and his followers were shouting threats and insults. But there were also students who were starting to think about what they were witnessing. Zira ate her food slowly, still hardly believing what was happening. For the first time since arriving at the academy, she was not eating alone. For the first time in weeks, she was not being laughed at or threatened. "Thank you," she said quietly to the humans sitting around her. "Don't thank us yet," Jiho replied. "This is just the beginning. Things are probably going to get harder before they get better." "I know," Zira said, "but thank you anyway." As lunchtime ended and students began to leave the cafeteria, the battle lines had been drawn. On one side were those who believed that enemies should remain enemies forever. On the other side were those who believed that even former enemies deserved basic human dignity. The war for Zira's place at the academy was just beginning. News of what happened in the cafeteria spread through the academy like wildfire. By evening, every student on the station knew about the human who had sat down to eat with the Veilter girl. But people had very different opinions about what it meant. In the human dormitory that night, heated arguments broke out in every room and hallway. Some students thought Jiho was a hero for standing up to bullies. Others thought he was a traitor who had dishonored the memory of humans who died. In the war, Jiho sat on his bed trying to study, but the arguments were too loud to ignore. Down the hall, he could hear Dongyun shouting at someone. "My uncle died fighting those monsters," Dongyun yelled. "He came home in a box because of the Veilter. And now we're supposed to be friends with them? That girl didn't kill your uncle." Another voice replied. "She was probably just a child when the war happened. All Veilter are killers," Dongyun shot back. "They're raised from birth to be warriors. She's probably more dangerous than any of us realize." Menho sat at his desk, listening to the argument with a worried expression. "Maybe we made a mistake," he said to Jiho. "Everyone is really angry. Let them be angry," Jiho replied. "Being angry doesn't make them right. But what if Dongyun is correct? What if she really is dangerous?" Jiho looked at his roommate. "Do you think she's dangerous?" Minho thought about this. He remembered seeing Zira in the cafeteria, sitting alone with tears in her eyes. He remembered how surprised and grateful she had looked when Jiho offered to share his food. "No," he said finally. "She just seems scared and lonely." "Then trust your own judgment," Jiho said. "Don't let other people's fear make your decisions for you." But not everyone was convinced. The next morning, Jiho found a note slipped under his door. It was written in angry handwriting and said, "Stop helping the enemy or you'll be sorry." Similar notes appeared under the doors of Minho, Nari, and Heian. Someone was trying to scare them into abandoning Zir. At breakfast, the four humans sat together at a different table. They had agreed to meet early before most other students arrived, but they were not alone. Zero was already there, waiting for them. "I've been thinking," she said as they sat down. "Maybe you should stop sitting with me. I don't want you to get in trouble because of me." "We're already in trouble," Nari said. "Someone left a threatening note under my door last night. I got one too," Heian added. "But I'm not going to let bullies make my decisions for me." "Besides," Jiho said, "if we abandon you now, it proves that their intimidation tactics work. Then they'll use the same methods against other people they don't like." More students began arriving for breakfast. Many of them stared at the table where the humans sat with Zira. Some looks were angry, but others seemed curious or even approving. A group of first-year human students walked past their table. One of them, a young man named Kyungsu, slowed down and looked like he wanted to say something, but his friends pulled him along before he could speak. "That one looked friendly," Zira observed. "A lot of people are still deciding what they think." Nari said, "Change takes time. She was right." Over the next few days, more humans began to approach their group. Not all of them were ready to sit with Zira, but they wanted to hear what Jiho and his friends had to say. King Su was the first to actually join them for a meal. He was very nervous and kept looking around to see if anyone was watching. But he sat down and introduced himself to Zira. "I'm sorry about how people have been treating you," he said. "It's not right." "Thank you," Zira replied. "What made you decide to sit with us?" Kyung Su looked embarrassed. "I was bullied a lot when I first arrived here. I'm from a small farming planet, and the other human students made fun of me for being a country boy. I know what it feels like to eat alone." "But you're human," Zira said. "I'm supposed to be your enemy." "You don't seem like an enemy to me." Kyung Su replied, "You seem like someone who needs friends." Word of Kyung Su's decision spread through the human dormitory. Some students called him weak or stupid, but others started to reconsider their own positions. Heian played an important role in changing minds. As a medical student, other students respected her intelligence and judgment. When people asked her why she was helping Zira, she had a simple answer. "As a future doctor, I swore to help people who are suffering," she said. "It doesn't matter what species they are or what their people might have done in the past. Zira is suffering and she needs help." This argument convinced several other medical students to join their group. They began sitting with Zira during meals and defending her when other students made cruel comments, but the biggest change came from an unexpected source. Dongyun, who had been one of Zira's harshest critics, had a change of heart after a conversation with his grandfather. Dongyun called his grandfather on Earth to complain about the humans who were befriending the Velter girl. He expected his grandfather to be angry about it, since his grandfather's brother had died in the war. Instead, his grandfather surprised him. "You know," the old man said, "I fought in 3 different wars during my lifetime. I killed people, and I watched friends die. But the thing I'm most proud of is what happened after the wars ended." "What do you mean?" Dongyun asked. "I helped rebuild schools on planets that used to be our enemies. I worked alongside people whose armies had killed my friends. At first, I hated it. But eventually I realized that the children in those schools weren't responsible for what their parents had done." "But the Velter are different," Dongyun protested. "They're more violent than other species." "Maybe," his grandfather said. "But this girl you're talking about, did she personally hurt anyone you know?" Dongyun had to admit that she hadn't. "Then maybe she deserves a chance to prove that she's different from what you expect." His grandfather suggested this conversation changed Dongyun's mind. He didn't immediately start sitting with Zira, but he stopped making hostile comments about her. He also stopped other human students from saying cruel things when he was around. "Let's see what she does," he told his friends. "If she really is dangerous, we'll find out eventually. But if she's not, then we're just picking on someone who lost her whole family in the war." This more moderate position appealed to many human students who had been unsure what to think. They weren't ready to become Zira's friends, but they were willing to give her a chance to prove herself. The change in atmosphere was noticeable. Fewer students laughed when Zira walked past. Fewer people tried to cut in front of her in food lines. The constant stream of cruel comments and accidents began to slow down, but this progress made Tarek and his followers even more angry. They had expected the humans to abandon Zira once they faced social pressure. Instead, the humans seemed to be convincing other people to be nicer to her. "This is getting out of hand," Tarek complained to his friends. "If we don't do something soon, everyone will start thinking it's okay to be friendly with our enemies." Yuna, who had been one of Tarek's strongest human allies, was also worried. She had joined the campaign against Zira partly because she thought it would make her popular with the other students. But now she was starting to feel isolated as more humans began to support Zira. "Maybe we should try a different approach," she suggested. "Direct attacks on Zira aren't working. Maybe we should go after the humans who are helping her." "What do you mean?" Tarek asked. "Make their lives miserable until they abandon her," Yuna explained. "If we can break up their little group, Zira will be alone again." Tarek liked this idea. It was harder to attack Zira now that she always had humans around her. But the humans were still vulnerable. When they were alone, the war for Zira's place at the academy was about to enter a new and more dangerous phase. But she was no longer fighting it alone. For the first time since arriving at the academy, she had people on her side, and that made all the difference. The changes in the human dormitory began to spread to other parts of the academy. Students from different species watched as more humans started treating Zero with basic respect, and some began to question their own behavior. The first non-human to join their group was Kale, a young Asarian student. Asarians looked similar to humans but had pale blue skin and slightly pointed ears. Kale was in his first year at the academy and had been struggling to fit in. Kale approached their table during lunch one day, looking nervous but determined. The conversation at nearby tables stopped as everyone watched to see what would happen. "May I sit here?" he asked quietly. Jiho nodded toward an empty chair. "Of course." As Kale sat down, Zero looked at him with surprise. "You're not human," she said. "Why do you want to sit with me?" Kale looked embarrassed. "When I first arrived here, I didn't speak the common language very well. The other students made fun of my accent and called me stupid. You were kind to me during orientation week. You helped me find my classes when everyone else just laughed at me." Zero remembered this. She had seen the young Asarian looking lost and confused during his first days at the academy. While other students ignored him or made jokes about his poor language skills, she had quietly given him directions and helped him understand the daily schedule. "I forgot about that," Zero said. "I didn't," Kale replied. "You helped me when you had your own problems to worry about? It's time for me to return the favor." Kale's decision sent shockwaves through the Asarian student community. Asarians had been neutral in the war between the Veilter and the Galactic government, but they generally disliked conflict of any kind. Most Asarian students had simply avoided Zero rather than actively bullying her. Some Asarian students criticized Kale for getting involved in what they saw as someone else's problem, but others began to think about their own experiences as outsiders at the academy. Within a week, 2 more Asarian students had joined the group. They didn't say much during meals, but their presence sent a clear message that opposition to Zero was no longer universal. The changes weren't limited to students who supported Zero. Even among her enemies, cracks began to appear. Some of the Coraxian students who had followed Tarek started to have doubts. Coraxians valued strength and honor above all else, and there was something dishonorable about the way Tarek's group was treating one isolated girl. Borak, one of Tarek's closest friends, brought up these concerns during a private conversation. "Are we acting like honorable warriors?" he asked. "There are dozens of us and only one of her. Where is the honor in that?" Tarek's face darkened with anger. "She represents our enemies. There is no honor required when dealing with enemies." "But she's not fighting us," Borak pointed out. "She just wants to study and be left alone. A true warrior doesn't attack someone who isn't fighting back." "Whose side are you on?" Tarek demanded. "I'm on the side of honor," Borak replied. "And I don't see any honor in what we're doing." This argument created a split in the Coraxian community. The older, more traditional Coraxians began to side with Borak. They remembered the ancient Coraxian codes of conduct that emphasized protecting the weak rather than preying on them. But the younger Coraxians, especially those who had lost family members in the war, continued to support Tarek. They argued that the old codes didn't apply to enemies of their species. Meanwhile, Yuna was discovering that her position among the human students was becoming more difficult. As more humans began to support Zero, Yuna found herself increasingly isolated from her own people. She had hoped that opposing Zero would make her popular, but the opposite was happening. Students were starting to see her as someone who picked on the weak to make herself feel important. During a heated discussion in the human dormitory, another student challenged her directly. "What has Zero actually done to you personally?" asked Sungmin, a second-year student. "She doesn't have to do anything to me personally," Yuna replied. "Her people killed thousands of innocent humans." "Her people, not her," Sungmin pointed out. "She was probably just a kid when the war happened. My little sister is about her age, and I can't imagine holding her responsible for things that adult humans do." Other students in the dormitory nodded in agreement. This comparison to their own younger siblings made many students think about Zira differently. Yuna felt defensive. You don't understand. My brother was injured fighting the Veilter. He still has nightmares about what they did to his unit. I'm sorry about your brother, Sungmin said gently. But taking revenge on one girl who had nothing to do with what happened won't help him heal. These conversations were happening throughout the academy. Students were being forced to think seriously about their treatment of Zira and what it said. About their own character, some students changed their minds completely and joined the group that ate with Zira. Others remained opposed but became less vocal about it. A few, like Borak, chose to remain neutral while criticizing the worst behavior of their former allies, but Tarek's core group remained committed to making Zira's life miserable. If anything, the growing support for her made them more determined. To drive her away from the academy, they began targeting the students who helped Zira. Hoping to break up her support network through intimidation. Kyung-soo found his belongings vandalized twice in 1 week. Someone broke his personal communicator and poured sticky liquid on his study materials. When he tried to report these incidents, he was told there wasn't enough evidence to identify the culprits. Haeyeon discovered that someone had sabotaged her medical training equipment before an important exam. The sabotage was subtle enough that it looked like an accident, but it forced her to retake the exam and damaged her academic standing. Kale faced harassment from some of his fellow Asarians, who accused him of betraying his species by associating with a Veilter. Someone spread rumors that he was romantically involved with Zira, which embarrassed him greatly and made other Asarian students avoid him. These attacks were designed to send a clear message. Supporting Zira came with serious consequences. Some students got scared and stopped sitting with their group. The pressure was intense, and not everyone was strong enough to resist it, but the core group of supporters remained loyal. Jiho, Minho, Nari, and Haeyeon continued to eat with Zira every day despite the harassment they faced. Their determination inspired others to stay strong as well. They're trying to break us apart, Jiho observed during one of their meals. If we stay together, we're stronger than they think. But what if they escalate? Nari asked. The sabotage is getting more serious. Someone could get really hurt. Someone already did get hurt, Zira said quietly. The question is whether we're going to let the bullies win, or if we're going to keep fighting for what's right. Haeyeon nodded. As future officers in the Galactic Fleet, we're supposed to protect people who can't protect themselves. If we can't do that here at the Academy, how can we be trusted to do it in space? This reminder of their future responsibilities strengthened their resolve. They weren't just fighting for Zira anymore. They were fighting for the kind of military officers they wanted to become. The Academy administration continued to avoid taking strong action. They made vague statements about unity and respect, but they didn't punish anyone for the harassment and sabotage. Some instructors privately supported what Jiho's group was doing, but they were reluctant to get involved in what they saw as student politics. Other instructors thought the situation was a useful learning experience. They believed that dealing with prejudice and conflict was part of preparing students for the realities of military service, but a few instructors were becoming concerned about the escalating violence. They worried that someone would be seriously injured if the situation continued to spiral out of control. The Academy was approaching a crisis point, and everyone could feel it. The question was, what would happen first? Would the harassment campaign succeed in driving Zira away, or would enough students find the courage to stand up for what was right? The answer would determine not just Zira's future, but the character of the entire Academy. The most important event of the Academy year was approaching, the Grand War Games. This was a massive military exercise where students were divided into mixed teams and had to complete complex missions using everything they had learned. The games lasted for 3 days and determined which students would graduate with honors. Every student knew that the War Games could make or break their military career. The best performers would be offered positions on the most prestigious ships in the fleet. Poor performers might find themselves assigned to cargo haulers or remote monitoring stations. The teams for the War Games were supposedly chosen at random, by computer, but everyone suspected that the instructors manipulated the selections to create interesting challenges. This year, those suspicions proved correct when the team assignments were announced. Zira had been placed on Team 7 with 5 other students: Tarek, Yuna, and 3 other students who had been among her worst tormentors. It was clearly designed to be a test of whether former enemies could work together under pressure. Jaho's group of friends had been split up and placed on different teams. This was also clearly intentional. The instructors wanted to see how they performed without their usual support network. "This is obviously a setup," Minho complained as they studied the team assignments. "They put Zero with her worst enemies and separated all of us." "Maybe that's the point," Nari suggested. "In real military situations, we won't get to choose who we work with. We'll have to find ways to cooperate with people we don't like." "Easy for you to say," Heian muttered. "Your team doesn't include anyone who has tried to kill you." They all looked at Zira, who was staring at her team assignment with a resigned expression. "Are you going to be okay?" Jiho asked her. Zira shrugged. "I don't have a choice. If I refuse to participate, I'll fail the academy. This might be my only chance to prove that I belong here." The war games began the next morning. Each team was given a different mission to complete in the Academy's massive simulation complex. The complex could recreate any environment: alien, planets, space stations, or even the inside of enemy ships. Team 7's mission was to infiltrate an enemy base, rescue hostages, and escape without being detected. It required stealth, teamwork, and careful coordination. If even one team member made a serious mistake, the entire mission would fail. Jiho's team was assigned to a different part of the simulation complex, but all teams could monitor each other's progress through the Academy's communication system. This meant that everyone would be able to watch what happened between Zira and her teammates. From the beginning, it was clear that Team 7 had no intention of working with Zira as an equal partner. During the planning phase, Tarek ignored all of her suggestions and assigned her the most dangerous and isolated tasks. "You'll scout ahead and clear the perimeter," Tarek told her. "The rest of us will handle the main objective." This was a classic setup. By sending Zira ahead alone, Tarek could claim she had volunteered for the dangerous work. If she succeeded, he could take credit for good planning. If she failed or got captured, he could blame her for the team's failure. Zira understood what was happening, but she had no choice but to accept the assignment. She needed her team to succeed if she wanted to pass the war games. The simulated enemy base was located in a dense jungle environment. The computer-generated enemies were programmed to be highly alert and aggressive. Students who were killed in the simulation would fail the exercise and have to repeat the academy year. Zira moved through the jungle with careful precision. Her Velter training had taught her to be silent and observant. She identified enemy patrol patterns, disabled security sensors, and created safe paths for her team to follow. Meanwhile, Tarek and the others waited in a safe position far from the base. They were supposed to move forward once Zira gave them the all-clear signal, but they had already decided on a different plan. "How long do we wait?" one of Tarek's teammates asked. "Long enough for her to get captured or killed," Tarek replied. "Then we complete the mission without her. If anyone asks, we'll say she went off on her own and we couldn't stop her. What if she succeeds in clearing the perimeter?" Yuna asked. "She won't," Tarek said confidently. "I assigned her an impossible task. Even if she somehow manages it, we'll just say we never received her signal." But Tarek had underestimated Zira's abilities. Despite being given an almost impossible assignment, she systematically eliminated every threat around the enemy base. She disabled guard posts, created diversions to draw enemies away from key areas, and opened multiple escape routes. When she sent the all-clear signal to her team, there was no response. She waited for 10 minutes, then sent the signal again. Still no response. Finally, she used her personal communicator to contact Tarek directly. "Perimeter is clear," she whispered. "Ready for main assault?" "We didn't receive any signal," Tarek lied. "You must have missed some enemies. Stay in position and keep trying." Zira knew she hadn't missed anyone, but she had no way to prove it. She could only watch from her hiding position as precious time ticked away. The longer they waited, the more likely it was that enemy reinforcements would arrive. After another hour, it became clear that her team was not coming. They had abandoned her, just as they had during the previous simulation exercise, but this time, Zero was not willing to accept failure. She had worked too hard and suffered too much at the academy to let Tarek's sabotage destroy her future. She made a decision that surprised everyone. She would complete the entire mission by herself. The hostage rescue was supposed to require coordinated teamwork. One group would create a distraction while another group freed the prisoners and a third group secured the escape route. Zero would have to do all of these things alone. She began by creating multiple small explosions around the base to simulate a large attacking force. While the simulated enemies responded to these diversions, she slipped into the base through a maintenance tunnel she had discovered earlier. Finding the hostages took precious time. The base was large and maze-like, with many dead ends and false passages. But Zira's methodical approach eventually led her to the detention area. The simulated hostages were actually junior students from the academy, who were playing their roles very seriously. They looked surprised when a single Veilter girl appeared to rescue them instead of a full team. "Where's the rest of your team?" one of them whispered. "It's just me," Zira replied. "Stay quiet and follow my lead." Leading 6 people through an enemy base while avoiding detection was incredibly difficult. Zira had to use every bit of stealth training she had ever received. They moved in single file, following the safe paths she had mapped out earlier. They were almost to the extraction point when disaster struck. One of the simulated hostages accidentally knocked over a piece of equipment, triggering an alarm. Suddenly, the entire base was on high alert. Computer-generated enemies swarmed toward their position, cutting off their planned escape route. In a real military situation, this would be the moment to call for backup from the rest of the team. But Zira's team was still hiding in the forest, pretending they had never received her signals. Watching from his own simulation, Jiho saw what was happening through the academy's monitoring system. His heart raced as he realized that Zira was trapped with no way out. "She needs help," he said to his teammates. "We can't help her," his team leader replied. "We have our own mission to complete. Besides, interfering with another team's exercise is against the rules." "The rules don't matter if someone is about to fail because of sabotage," Jiho argued. "You don't know that it's sabotage," another teammate said. "Maybe her team is just following a different strategy." But Jiho had been monitoring Team 7's communications. He knew that Tarek and the others were deliberately abandoning Zira. He also knew that if she failed this exercise, she would probably be expelled from the academy. He faced the most difficult decision of his time at the academy. He could follow the rules and focus on his own mission, or he could break the rules to help someone who was being treated unfairly. The choice would define not just his own character, but his entire future as a military officer. "I'm sorry," he told his teammates. "I can't just watch this happen." Before anyone could stop him, Jiho abandoned his own mission and headed toward the area where Zira was trapped. He was quickly followed by Minho, Nari, and Heian, who had made the same decision on their respective teams. "We're coming, Zira," Jiho said into his communicator. "Hold on." What happened next would be remembered at the academy for years to come. The rescue operation that followed broke every rule in the academy handbook, but it also demonstrated the highest principles of military service. Jiho and his friends abandoned their own missions and rushed through the simulation complex to reach Zira's position. They had to fight their way through multiple enemy-controlled areas, using tactics they had learned in class but had never tried under such intense pressure. When they finally reached Zira, she was surrounded by simulated enemies, with no apparent way out. The hostages she had rescued were hiding behind a damaged wall, terrified by the sound of approaching footsteps and weapons fire. "Over here!" Jiho shouted as he and his friends burst into the area, their simulated weapons blazing, the computer generated. Enemies turned to face this new threat, giving Zira the opening she needed. Working together for the first time, The 5 human students and 1 Veilter girl fought their way out of the enemy base. It was not easy. The simulation was designed to be challenging for full teams working together, not for a handful of students who had never trained as a unit. But somehow, they managed to reach the extraction point with all the hostages intact. As they crossed the finish line, alarms began blaring throughout the simulation complex. The exercise was immediately shut down, and all students were ordered to report to the main auditorium. Gao and his friends knew they were in serious trouble. By abandoning their assigned missions to help Zira, they had violated multiple Academy regulations. They could face suspension, expulsion, or even criminal charges for interfering with a military exercise. Admiral Chun, the Academy commander, stood at the front of the auditorium with a stern expression. Behind him sat the entire teaching staff, looking equally serious. What happened today, Admiral Chun began, represents either the worst breach of discipline in Academy history, or the finest example of leadership we have ever seen. It will take a formal investigation to determine which. The auditorium was completely silent. Nearly 1,000 students waited to hear the fate of their classmates. 5 students abandoned their assigned missions and violated direct orders. The Admiral continued, in a real military situation, such behavior would be considered mutiny. The penalties for mutiny include court-martial and imprisonment. Jiho felt his stomach twist with fear. He had known that helping Zira might have consequences, but he hadn't fully considered how serious those consequences might be. However, Admiral Chun said, these same 5 students demonstrated extraordinary courage in rescuing a fellow cadet who had been abandoned by her assigned team. They risked their own careers to ensure that no one was left behind. The Admiral paused and looked directly at Jiho and his friends. Military service is built on many principles, he said. Following orders is one of them. But protecting your comrades is another. When these principles conflict, military officers must make difficult choices. He activated a large screen that showed the complete recordings of the day's exercises. Everyone in the auditorium could see exactly what had happened, how Tarek's team had deliberately abandoned Zira, how she had completed an impossible mission alone, and how Jiho's group had risked everything to save her. Team 7 failed their mission not because of enemy action, but because of cowardice and betrayal, Admiral Chun announced. They abandoned a teammate who was successfully completing her assigned tasks. Such behavior is not only dishonorable, it violates the most basic principles of military service. Tarek and his teammates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had expected to be praised for completing their mission while Zira failed hers. Instead, they were being publicly condemned. On the other hand, the Admiral continued, the students who violated regulations to rescue their comrade demonstrated the kind of leadership we hope to develop in our future officers. They understood that some things are more important than following orders. Admiral Chun looked out at the assembled students. Let me be very clear about the lessons of today's exercise. First, we do not abandon our comrades regardless of their species or background. Second, courage sometimes requires breaking rules to do what is right. Third, the measure of a person's character is not what species they belong to, but how they treat others when no one is watching. He paused again, letting his words sink in. After reviewing all the evidence, this academy has reached the following decisions. The students of Team 7 will retake the War Games exercise with properly mixed teams. Their previous performance will not count toward their graduation requirements. This was a serious punishment. Having to retake the War Games meant extra months at the academy and a permanent mark on their records. As for the students who violated regulations to rescue their comrade, Admiral Chun said, they will receive commendations for exceptional leadership and courage. Their actions today represent the highest ideals of military service. The auditorium erupted in surprised murmurs. Instead of being punished, Jiho and his friends were being rewarded, but Admiral Chun wasn't finished. However, the most important recognition today goes to Cadet Zira, who,